The silence in the meeting room was so dense it seemed to suffocate. 30 executives held their breath as they watched the scene unfold before them. Richard Thornfield, the billionaire owner of Thornfield Industries, stood with his face flushed red with rage and disbelief. On the other side of the table, Elena Rodriguez remained expressionless, her eyes locked on his, holding a white envelope between her fingers. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice trembling. "This is absolutely impossible." Elena stepped forward and placed the envelope on the polished mahogany table. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. "Mr. Thornfield," she said calmly, "you made a bet. You bet your entire fortune that I wouldn't be able to answer your question. I answered it. And now—" She paused, letting the suspense hang in the air. "And now you're going to keep your word? Or are you just another rich man who doesn't honor his commitments?" The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Richard stumbling backward, leaning on his chair for support. How had they gotten here? How had a simple secretary achieved the impossible? To understand, we need to go back 3 months in time, to the day when it all began. 3 months earlier, on an ordinary Monday morning, Elena Rodriguez entered the imposing Thornfield Industries building at exactly 7 a.m. As always, she was never late, never left a task unfinished, never complained. At 32 years old, Elena had worked as an executive secretary at the company for 5 years, and during all that time she had been practically invisible to her boss. Richard Thornfield had inherited the textile empire from his father at the age of 28. Over the next 15 years, he transformed the company into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with tentacles in technology, real estate, and investments. He was admired by the media, feared by competitors, and despised by those who worked directly with him. It wasn't just arrogance that defined Richard. He was deliberately cruel. He had a habit of humiliating employees in public, especially those he considered beneath him. And to him, secretaries, assistants, and support staff definitely fell into that category. On that particular morning, Elena was organizing documents for the 9 o'clock board meeting when Richard stormed into her office like a hurricane. He didn't even look at her. "Coffee, now. And don't bring me that weak garbage from yesterday," he barked, tossing his Italian leather briefcase onto her desk, knocking over a neatly stacked pile of reports. "Good morning, Mr. Thornfield," Elena replied politely, standing up. "The coffee is already prepared the way you like it. I'll get it." Richard ignored her completely, already focused on his phone, yelling at someone on the other end about stocks that had dropped 2%. 3 minutes later, Elena returned with the perfect coffee. Double espresso, 1 spoonful of sugar, exactly 75 degrees. She knew this because she had noted down every single one of his preferences over the years. Richard took the cup without a word of thanks and took a sip. "It's lukewarm," he said, even though it wasn't. "You can't even get this right." Elena took a deep breath. "Mr. Thornfield, the coffee is at the temperature you've always preferred, 75 degrees. Richard raised his eyes for the first time, surprised that she had bothered to respond. A cruel smile spread across his lips. "Oh, so now you're contradicting me? Interesting." He stood up, circling the desk toward her. "Do you know what your problem is, Elena? You think that because you've been here for 5 years it actually means something. But the truth is you're replaceable, completely replaceable. There are 1,000 girls out there who'd do your job for half your salary." Elena maintained her composure, but something flickered in her eyes for a split second. Richard didn't notice, or didn't care. "Do you know why I keep you here?" he continued, clearly amused. "Because you're efficient, like a machine. You don't have opinions, you don't have personality, nothing about you annoys me. You're convenient." "I understand, sir," Elena simply replied. "I doubt it," Richard laughed. "People like you never understand people like me. You live in completely different worlds. I make decisions that move millions. You organize papers." He went back to his office, leaving Elena alone with the scattered documents and the perfectly prepared coffee he wouldn't even finish. But that wasn't an isolated day. This happened every week, sometimes every day. Richard had a special talent for finding new and creative ways to belittle those around him. and Elena had always been an easy target because she never reacted. The following week, during a meeting with international investors, Richard asked Elena to bring in the financial reports. When she entered the boardroom, he stopped her in the middle of the room. "Wait," he said, making a dramatic gesture. "Gentlemen, I want to try an interesting exercise." He looked at Elena with the smile she had learned to fear. "Elena, how long have you worked here?" "5 years, Mr. Thornfield," she answered, feeling the eyes of all the executives on her. "5 years," Richard repeated, nodding theatrically. "And in 5 years, have you learned anything about actually running a business? Or are you still just organizing papers and serving coffee?" Subtle laughter echoed through the room. Elena felt heat rising up her neck but kept her voice steady. "I do my job, sir." "Your job?" Richard laughed. "Let me ask you a simple question then, just to see if 5 years have amounted to anything. What was our net profit last quarter?" Elena stared at him. She knew the answer. She had organized those reports, but she saw the trap. If she answered correctly, he would accuse her of overstepping her position. If she got it wrong, she would prove his point. 147 million, sir," she answered calmly. Richard blinked, surprised for a moment but quickly regained his composure. "Anyone can memorize numbers," he said, turning to the investors. "But understanding what they mean, the strategies behind them, the decisions that must be made, that's for superior minds." Elena placed the reports on the table and left the room, hearing more laughter behind her. But she didn't know that that moment, that public humiliation, was planting the seed for what was to come. Because Elena Rodriguez had secrets. Secrets no one at Thornfield Industries knew. Secrets she kept hidden beneath the facade of an efficient, invisible secretary. And soon Richard Thornfield would discover that he had completely underestimated the woman who organized his papers. 2 weeks after the humiliation in the boardroom, Elena was in her small downtown apartment surrounded by something no one at Thornfield Industries would have imagined. Books. Hundreds of them. Books on economics, business strategy, advanced mathematics, game theory, and even behavioral psychology. The truth was, Elena Rodriguez was not just a secretary. She had graduated with honors in business administration from Columbia University. She had a master's degree in economics from the same institution. She had been accepted into a PhD program in corporate strategy, but had to leave when her father suffered a stroke, and she needed to return home to care for him and her younger sister. The medical bills were astronomical. She needed a job immediately, something that paid well and offered stability. The executive secretary position at Thornfield Industries offered exactly that. The salary was excellent for the role, and she could send money home every month. But accepting that job meant putting her dreams on hold. It meant being treated as inferior by people with half her education and intelligence. It meant swallowing daily humiliations and smiling through them. For 5 years, that is exactly what she had done, but something was changing. Richard's humiliations were becoming more frequent, more cruel, and Elena was starting to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. That night, as she studied financial reports she had discreetly copied from the office, her phone rang. It was Marcus Chen, her only true friend at the company. Marcus worked in IT, and unlike most people, he had always treated her with respect. "Elena, you need to see this," Marcus said as soon as she answered. "Richard is planning something big. I overheard him talking to the directors today. He's going to have another one of his showy meetings next week. He's bringing in important investors, and apparently he plans some kind of public demonstration of leadership." Elena sighed. "Let me guess. I'm going to be part of the demonstration." "Probably," Marcus confirmed. "Sorry, I just wanted to warn you." "Thanks, Marcus." After hanging up, Elena stared at the wall of her apartment. How much longer? How much longer would she allow Richard Thornfield to use her as a stepping stone for his ego? The answer came faster than she expected. The following Monday, just as Marcus had predicted, Richard called a special meeting. The main conference room was packed. There were at least 50 people, company executives, potential investors, some business journalists, and even a well-known host from an entrepreneurship show. Richard was in his element, wearing his $5,000 Italian suit, the Rolex gleaming on his wrist, hair perfectly slicked back. He was presenting the company's expansion into the Asian market, an ambitious $2 billion project. Elena sat quietly in the corner, taking notes as instructed. She already knew what was coming. She could feel it. The way Richard occasionally glanced in her direction, that predatory smile on his lips. And then it happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard said, pausing dramatically in his presentation, "I have always believed that business success comes from a clear understanding of hierarchy and value. Some people are visionaries, others are, well, let's say, necessary support." Polite laughter rippled through the room. "For example," he continued, and Elena felt her stomach tighten. "My executive secretary, Elena, has been here for 5 years. 5 years organizing my schedule, preparing coffee, filing documents. Is it important work? Of course. Someone needs to do it. But let's be honest about the level of skill required." Elena kept her face neutral, but her hands gripped the pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. "In fact," Richard said, eyes glinting with malice, "I'm going to do a little demonstration. Elena, please come up here. Please come." Elena's heart raced. She considered refusing, but she knew that would only make things worse. She stood and walked to the front of the room, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on her. "Thank you for being a good sport," Richard said with false kindness. Then, turning to the audience, he continued, "I'm going to ask Elena some business questions, basic questions that anyone in this room could answer. Let's see how someone who's worked 5 years at a billion-dollar company performs." Elena realized the game. If she answered correctly, he would accuse her of having studied specifically for this. If she was wrong, he would prove she was incompetent. It was a no-win situation. But then, something inside her broke. Or perhaps, finally, it was freed. "Ask your questions, Mr. Thornfield," she said, her voice firmer than she intended. Richard smiled, savoring the moment. "Very well. First question. What is the current Federal Reserve interest rate?" 4.5%, Elena answered immediately. A slight frown appeared on Richard's face, but he continued. "What was the U.S. GDP growth percentage last quarter?" 2.1%, she said without hesitation. People in the room began to stir, intrigued. Richard was starting to lose control of his little demonstration. "All right," he said, voice slightly tenser. "How about something more specific? What was the exact operating profit of Thornfield Industries in Q3 last year?" Elena looked him directly in the eyes. $183,457,000. A 17% increase compared to the same period last year, driven mainly by the acquisition of data tech solutions and expansion into the sustainable manufacturing sector. The silence in the room was palpable. Richard was visibly uncomfortable now. "Anyone can memorize numbers," he said, repeating the same line from weeks ago. "But understanding real strategy, making real decisions, like the decision to expand into Asia?" Elena interrupted, surprising even herself with her boldness. "Mr. Thornfield, may I make an observation about your expansion plan?" The entire room went completely silent. No one ever interrupted Richard Thornfield, much less a secretary. Richard's face turned red. "You're trying to give me business advice? You?" "Not advice, sir. Just an observation. You are planning to invest $2 billion in manufacturing in China and Vietnam. But according to the latest economic projections, there is a 72% probability that new tariffs will be imposed on Asian imports over the next 18 months. This could reduce your profit margin by at least 30%, making the entire venture unprofitable." Murmurs ran through the room. Some investors were now looking at each other, clearly concerned. Richard was furious. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't have access to our strategic analysis reports." "I don't need them," Elena said calmly. "I read Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Financial Times. They all published analyses on current business trends. Anyone paying attention would know this." At that moment, something shifted in the room. Executives and investors were no longer looking at Elena condescendingly. They were looking at her with curiosity, and some were looking at Richard with doubt. Richard realized he was losing control, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "You know what?" he said, voice now dripping with barely contained anger. "You think you're smart? Let's do something interesting. Let's make a real bet." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Sir?" "That's right, a bet. In front of everyone here." Richard scanned the room, making sure he had everyone's attention. "I will ask you one question, one single question. If you can answer correctly, and I mean truly answer, with details and evidence that satisfy everyone in this room, then I will give you $10 million. Gasps echoed across the room. Elena froze. "But if you fail," Richard continued, a cruel smile returning to his lips, "you will be fired. Immediately. No recommendation letter, no severance, nothing. And everyone here will witness that it was a fair bet." "Richard, this is ridiculous," one of the directors said, standing. "You can't." "I can," Richard cut him off. "It's my money, my company, and I'm making a serious bet here." He looked back at Elena. "So, do you accept, or will you finally admit that you're out of your league?" Elena should have walked away, should have kept her head down, returned to her desk and gone on with her life. But 5 years of humiliations, 5 years of being treated as inferior, 5 years of swallowing her intelligence and education. "I accept," she heard her own voice say. Richard blinked, clearly surprised she had agreed. But he quickly recovered, the smile returning. "Excellent," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Here is my question, and it is not about memorizing numbers or facts you can read in newspapers. I will give you a real-world scenario, a complex business situation, and you must tell me exactly what to do. Understood?" Elena nodded, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Richard picked up a marker and began writing on the whiteboard. Scenario: you are CEO of a tech company. You have 3 investment options. Option A: invest in AI development, a saturated market, but potentially revolutionary. Option B: expand into emerging markets in Africa, high risk, but potentially high return. Option C: consolidate current operations, slow but stable growth. You have $1 billion to invest. You have 30 days to decide, and here's the catch. He turned, eyes glinting with malice. Each option has exactly a 50% chance of success or failure, completely unpredictable. So Elena, tell me, which do you choose and why? And don't give me a generic answer. I want the full analysis, including how you would manage the risk, convince the board, and what your plan B would be if everything went wrong. The room was completely silent. It was an impossible question. There was no right answer. It was exactly the kind of dilemma even experienced CEOs would struggle with. And Richard knew it. He crossed his arms, satisfied with himself. You have 5 minutes to answer, starting now. Elena looked at the whiteboard, at the 3 options written there. Her brain was working at full speed. She knew it was a trap. She knew that whatever answer she gave, Richard would find a way to claim it was wrong. But then she realized something that would change everything. If you are enjoying this exciting story, subscribe to the channel and comment below with the city you are watching from. I want to know how far this story is reaching. The 5 minutes were passing. Elena could see Richard checking his watch, the smile widening with each second. The others in the room were shifting uncomfortably, some looking at her with pity. 30 seconds remained. Elena took a deep breath, and then she smiled. For the first time in 5 years, she smiled directly at Richard Thornfield. I have my answer, she said. Richard Thornfield raised an eyebrow, the smile still plastered on his face. Oh, do you? Well, I'm eager to hear. Please enlighten us with your infinite wisdom. Elena stepped forward, approaching the whiteboard. She took the marker from Richard's hand with such a confident motion that he was momentarily thrown off balance. Before I answer, she began, her clear and firm voice echoing through the room. I need to clarify something about the premise of your question, Mr. Thornfield. The premise is clear, Richard replied, annoyed. 3 options, $1 billion, 30 days. What is there to clarify? You said that each option has exactly a 50% chance of success or failure, completely unpredictable. Elena looked him directly in the eyes. But that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how business actually works. Murmurs ran through the room. Richard frowned. Excuse me? No business decision is truly 50-50, Mr. Thornfield. That's a fallacy inexperienced people believe. Every decision can be tilted in your favor through proper preparation, market research, risk analysis, and most importantly, strategic execution. Elena began writing on the whiteboard. You presented me with a flawed test, and a real CEO would know that. The silence in the room was deafening. No one had ever spoken to Richard that way, much less publicly pointed out a flaw in his reasoning. Richard's face was turning red again. Are you trying to dodge the question with technicalities? No, sir. I am answering the real question behind your question. Elena turned to the audience. You don't want to know which option I would choose. You want to know how I think, how I approach complex problems. And the answer is, I reject false premises. She returned to the board and began writing quickly. If I were CEO in this situation, my first action wouldn't be to choose between A, B, or C. It would be to question why I'm limited to those three options. It would be to hire the best market analysts to turn those supposed 50-50 odds into 70-30 in my favor. It would be to split the investment strategically rather than putting all eggs in one basket. That doesn't answer the question, Richard said, though his voice had lost some of its previous confidence. It answers it perfectly, Elena shot back, because the real question here isn't about choosing an option. It's about how a leader thinks when confronted with uncertainty. And a true leader does not accept uncertainty passively. They transform it. One of the investors in the room, a gray-haired man named Robert Fitzgerald, suddenly leaned forward, intrigued. Continue, he said. This is getting interesting. Elena nodded. If forced to choose just one option with the full billion, I would choose option C, consolidation. Not because it is the safest, but because it is the only one that gives me total control over the outcome. AI and emerging markets depend on unpredictable external factors. But improving your own operations? That depends solely on you. Weak, Richard practically spat. You would choose the cowardly option. That proves my point. You have no vision. Let me finish, Elena said, and there was steel in her voice now. I would choose C as the primary move, but simultaneously, I would use 20% of the increased profits from consolidation to invest incrementally in the other options. Test AI on a small scale. Explore African markets with pilot projects. And here's the crucial part. I would give myself not 30 days to decide, but 18 months to validate. She turned to Richard. You set an arbitrary 30-day deadline because that's how you make decisions. Fast, impulsive, instinct-driven. But truly successful CEOs know when to be patient. They know some decisions cannot be rushed. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was thoughtful. Robert Fitzgerald began clapping slowly. Brilliant, he said. Absolutely brilliant. She's right, Richard. You presented a flawed test. Others in the room began nodding. Some were whispering among themselves, clearly impressed. Richard was visibly furious now. He had expected Elena to stammer, fail, or give a generic answer he could easily tear apart. Instead, she had turned the tables on him. Interesting, Richard finally said, his voice dangerously low. You think you're very smart, don't you? Think you just beat me? It's not about winning, Mr. Thornfield, Elena replied calmly. It's about demonstrating that competence has nothing to do with position or salary. It's about capability. Richard looked around the room, seeing the expressions on people's faces. He was losing control of the narrative, and for a man like him, that was unacceptable. You know what? He said suddenly, his voice rising. Forget it. Let's really make this interesting. He pointed at Elena. You want to prove you're competent? That you're not just a secretary with ideas above your station? Then let's make a real bet. Richard, one of the directors stood again. I really think you should stop this now. Shut up, James, Richard cut him off. This is between me and her. He looked directly at Elena. Here's the real bet, not just 10 million. I'm wagering my entire fortune, everything, every penny, every share, every property. Gasps echoed through the room. Someone dropped a pen. The sound echoed like a gunshot. You're insane, James said, standing completely now. Richard, your personal fortune is estimated at $3.2 billion. You can't. I can and I will, Richard said. He was completely consumed by anger and arrogance now. Here's the bet. I will give you a real challenge. Something no secretary, no ordinary person could possibly do. If you succeed, my entire fortune is yours. If you fail, you will not only be fired but sign an ironclad confidentiality agreement ensuring you never work at any major corporate company again. Richard, this is insane. Robert Fitzgerald stood now. As a shareholder, I cannot allow. My personal fortune has nothing to do with the company, Robert, Richard retorted. This is between me and my arrogant secretary here. Elena should have refused. Anyone sensible would have refused. But something was burning inside her now. 5 years. 5 years of humiliation. 5 years of being invisible. 5 years of men like Richard Thornfield stepping on people like her. What's the challenge? She heard her own voice ask. Richard smiled. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. Here it is. In 30 days you will present a full business plan for a startup. Not just any plan. A plan so good, so viable, so innovative that I, personally, would invest $100 million in it if it were presented by anyone else. He began pacing the room, hands behind his back. But here's the catch. You cannot seek help from anyone. No consultants, no lawyers, no specialists. You alone. And the plan will be evaluated not by me, but by a panel of 5 venture capital investors I will select. If 4 out of 5 agree the plan is worth investing in, you win. Everything. He stopped in front of her. But if even a single investor votes against it, if even one person deems the plan flawed, you lose. Everything. Do you accept? The entire room was watching Elena now. Some with pity, some with morbid curiosity, some like Robert Fitzgerald, with what seemed like respect. Elena thought of her father, still recovering from the stroke. She thought of her sister, trying to pay for college. She thought of all the years she had sacrificed her dreams to care for her family. And she thought of Richard Thornfield, and all men like him, who believed power and money made them superior. I accept, she said. The room erupted in murmurs. James had his hands on his head. Robert Fitzgerald was smiling, clearly fascinated by the unfolding events. The journalists present were feverishly taking notes. Richard extended his hand. Then we have a deal. Let's make this official. My lawyers will prepare the documents by tomorrow. You have 30 days starting now. Elena shook his hand, firm, cold. 29 days, she corrected. Today is almost over. Richard laughed. A genuine laugh this time, but not of joy, of anticipation. Oh, this is going to be fun. Watching you fail. Watching you finally understand your place. We'll see, Elena said simply. That night, Elena sat in her apartment, staring at the stack of papers she had brought from the office. What had she done? She had just wagered her entire future against a vengeful billionaire who was clearly planning to stack the deck against her. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. Elena, are you okay? Everyone at the company is talking about what happened. Half think you're brave, the other half think you've lost your mind. And which half are you in? She asked. I'm in a third category, Marcus said. I think you can actually do this. Marcus, he's going to pick the toughest investors he can find. He'll do everything possible to make sure I fail. I know, Marcus said. But Elena, you're the smartest person I know. If anyone can do this, it's you. After hanging up, Elena opened her laptop. 29 days. She had 29 days to create something extraordinary. something so good that even biased investors couldn't deny it. She began taking notes, ideas flowing, but with each idea she thought, Richard will attack this. He will find flaws. How do I create something foolproof? At 3 a.m, she was still awake, surrounded by discarded papers and empty coffee cups. And then finally, an idea began to take shape. It wasn't complete yet, but it was something. A seed. She took a blank sheet and wrote at the top, Project Phoenix, democratizing executive education. It was risky, ambitious, and if it worked, it would be revolutionary. Elena smiled to herself in the dark, silent room. The game had only just begun. The following days were a blur. Elena woke at 5 a.m., worked on her plan until 7:30, went to the office, fulfilled her secretary duties. Richard had made it clear she still had to do her regular work, and returned home at 6 p.m. to work until midnight. Richard, for his part, was clearly enjoying himself. He deliberately increased her workload. Extra meetings, additional reports, last-minute tasks, all designed to sabotage her time. "How's your project coming along?" he would ask, feigning concern. "Is it hard balancing being a business visionary and making coffee too?" "I imagine it is." Elena didn't answer. She just smiled and kept going. But the real obstacle came in the second week. Elena was at her desk when an envelope was delivered. Inside was a list, the 5 investors who would evaluate her plan. Her heart sank as she read the names. Marcus glanced over her shoulder as he came to drop off some documents. "Oh no," he whispered. "Oh no," was an understatement. Richard had chosen the 5 most notoriously difficult and skeptical investors in the entire venture capital industry. People known to reject 99% of all business plans they saw. First was Victoria Blackwood, a billionaire investor famous for tearing entrepreneurs apart on TV, once making a startup founder cry live. Second was David Park, a tech investor who had rejected investing in Uber, Airbnb, and Instagram early on, calling them stupid ideas. He was now obsessively risk-averse. Third was Samira Al-Rahman, a Middle Eastern investor who only invested in companies with patentable proprietary technology. Everything else she considered noise. Fourth was James Kowalski, a Polish investor known for brutal financial analysis. He had destroyed entire companies by exposing flaws in cash flow projections. And fifth was Richard Thornfield Sr., Richard's father, the man who had built the Thornfield empire from scratch. A man who had never lost an investment in 50 years, and a man who would clearly back his son. Elena placed the list on the desk and laughed. Not a laugh of despair, a laugh of pure disbelief at Richard's audacity. "He's not even pretending this is fair," she said. "Elena, you need to give up," Marcus said seriously. "This isn't just unfair, it's impossible. Richard basically picked 5 people who will destroy you for sport." "I can't give up," Elena said calmly. "If I give up, he wins. And more than that, I'll never forgive myself." "But, Marcus, I spent 5 years of my life being invisible, being treated as inferior. I have a master's from Columbia. I was top of my class. And I spent 5 years serving coffee to a man who barely graduated from a state university his father paid for." She looked at him, fire in her eyes. "If I'm going to fall, I'll fall fighting, not hiding." Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay, so how can I help?" "You can't," Elena said. "Richard made it clear, no help. If he finds out anyone helped me, I automatically lose." "Then what will you do?" Elena looked out the window at the city stretching below. Millions of people, millions of stories, millions of dreams. "I will do exactly what I said I would," she replied. "I will create something so good even they cannot deny it." But that night, alone in her apartment, her confidence began to crack. Elena looked at her developing plan. It was good, but was it good enough against that panel? She had 14 days remaining, and for the first time since accepting the bet, she felt real fear. The 17th day arrived like a sentence. Elena had slept only 3 hours the night before, and her apartment looked like a war command center. Papers covered every available surface. 3 laptops were open, each displaying different sets of data. Charts and financial projections were taped to the walls. Her plan had evolved significantly since that first night. Project Phoenix was no longer just an idea. It was a full-fledged online executive education platform using adaptive artificial intelligence to personalize leadership curricula. The crucial difference was the price. While executive MBA programs cost between $50,000 and $200,000, her platform would charge only $500 per month. The democratization of elite executive education, revolutionary in theory. But Elena knew theory alone wouldn't be enough. She needed numbers, projections, market analysis, growth strategy, monetization plan, and everything had to be absolutely flawless. The problem was, the more she worked, the more she realized how difficult it would be to convince this specific panel. Victoria Blackwood would disdain the low price, arguing it devalued executive education. David Park would reject it as just another online education platform in a saturated market. Samira Al-Rahman would question the proprietary technology. James Kowalski would tear apart her financial projections. And Richard Thornfield Sr.? He would simply vote against it out of loyalty to his son. Elena was trapped in a labyrinth with no way out. She stared at her computer screen, her eyes burning with fatigue when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Elena Rodriguez?" A female voice she didn't recognize. "Who is this?" "My name is Catherine Moore. I'm a journalist with Business Insider. I heard about your bet with Richard Thornfield. I'd like to do an interview." Elena closed her eyes. Of course. The story had leaked. Probably by Richard himself wanting to add public pressure to private humiliation. "No comment," Elena said. "Just 5 minutes," Catherine insisted. "Elena, there are rumors that Richard picked an impossible panel. That this whole bet is a farce designed to destroy you publicly. People deserve to know the truth." "The truth," Elena said slowly, "is that I accepted a bet, and I will see it through to the end. That's all I have to say." She hung up before Catherine could respond. But the call planted a seed of doubt. What if Catherine was right? What if this whole bet was simply Richard's cruel theater? What if no matter how good her plan was, the outcome was already decided? Elena stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city was beginning to wake. People going to work, chasing dreams, or perhaps just surviving. Her phone buzzed again. This time a message from Marcus. "Turn on the TV, business news channel now." With a bad feeling in her stomach, Elena turned on the television. There was Richard Thornfield, impeccably dressed, sitting in a TV studio, being interviewed. "And look, I admire her confidence," Richard was saying with that fake smile. "But there's a reason why some people are secretaries and others are CEOs. It's about capability, about vision, about the ability to think at scale. Elena is a competent employee, no doubt. But creating a business plan worth $100 million? That requires a different kind of mind. Some critics are saying you deliberately chose an impossible panel," the interviewer asked. Richard laughed. "Impossible? I chose 5 of the best investors in the world. If her plan is truly good, they will recognize it. These are professionals. They don't let personal feelings influence investment decisions." He paused, and the smile turned crueler. "But between you and me, I think she's already realizing she bit off more than she can chew." Elena turned off the TV. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, with anger. He was trying to break her psychologically, using the media to add pressure, making her a public spectacle. But then something shifted in Elena. The anger crystallized into something colder, more focused. "Okay, Richard," she whispered to the empty apartment. "You want a game? Let's play." That morning, when Elena entered Thornfield Industries, she noticed something different. People were looking at her, some with pity, some with curiosity, but some, especially other women and junior employees, with something that looked like hope. A young woman from the accounting department stopped her in the hallway. "Sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say, many of us are rooting for you. What you're doing, it's brave." Elena smiled, surprised. Thank you. Seriously, the young woman continued, lowering her voice. Mr. Thornfield treats all of us like garbage. Seeing someone finally stand up to him, it means a lot. Throughout the day, more people approached her discreetly. A marketing assistant, a junior financial analyst, even one of the building's security guards. All with the same message: we're rooting for you. Elena realized something she hadn't considered before. This bet was no longer just about her. She had become a symbol for all underestimated employees, invisible assistants, all the people trampled by arrogant bosses, and that fundamentally changed her approach. That night she tore up half of her plan and started over. The 22nd day, 8 days remaining. Elena was in her apartment when her younger sister Sophia called via video. Elena, are you okay? I saw the news. Everyone at my college is talking about you. My professors are even discussing the case in business ethics class. Elena laughed despite everything. Really? Really? Half say you're crazy, the other half say you're a hero. Sophia paused. Elena, can you actually win this? Elena looked at the papers around her. Weeks of condensed work. Honestly, Sophie, I don't know. The panel Richard picked is nearly impossible, but I have to try. Because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Sophia smiled. Dad would be proud of you. You know that, right? Tears sprang to Elena's eyes. Her father had always believed in her, always said she was destined for great things. And then the illness came, the debts, and Elena had to abandon it all. How is he? She asked. Better, much better. Physical therapy is working. He made me promise to tell you he's rooting for you. Sophia hesitated. Elena, you know if you need to come back, if all this is too much, we'll understand, right? I know, Elena said softly, but I need to do this. Not just for me, for everyone counting on me now. After the call, Elena returned to work with renewed determination. The 25th day, 5 days remaining. Elena was making final adjustments to her plan when she received an unexpected email. It was from Robert Fitzgerald, the investor who had applauded her response at the original meeting. The email was brief. Ms. Rodriguez, I cannot help you directly without violating the terms of the bet, but I can give one piece of advice. Stop trying to impress the panel. Instead, find the one thing they cannot ignore. And no, it's not brilliance. It's need. Good luck. RF. Elena read the email 3 times. Find the need. She looked at her plan again. It was technically brilliant. Projections solid. Market strategy impeccable. But something was missing. Soul. The answer to the fundamental question, why must this exist? Elena grabbed a blank sheet and wrote at the top, Why Phoenix? And she began to write. Not with data, not with statistics, but with stories. Her story. A woman with a degree from a top university working as a secretary because she lacked the money or connections to advance. Marcus's story. A tech genius stuck in IT because he lacked the pedigree of big companies. The stories of thousands of talented, capable people trapped in positions below their potential because elite executive education was only accessible to the already wealthy. Phoenix was not just an education platform, it was a revolution, a way to break the closed corporate leadership club and open it to everyone. For the first time in weeks, Elena smiled. Not just a smile. She felt real hope. The 28th day, 2 days remaining. 2 days. Elena was putting the finishing touches on her presentation when Richard passed by her desk. Tomorrow's the big day, he said casually. Ready to admit defeat and quit? I'd still let you do it with dignity. Elena looked at him. Really looked. And realized beneath the arrogance there was insecurity. Richard Thornfield had inherited everything, never built anything himself, never truly proven himself. No, thank you, Elena said calmly. I'll see you at the presentation. Richard frowned, clearly expecting more resistance or fear. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, maybe, Elena replied. Or maybe you are. He left, but Elena noticed something she'd never seen before. For just a moment, Richard looked uncertain. The night before the presentation, Elena lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She had done everything she could. The plan was complete. The presentation ready. Now it was just a matter of execution. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. You're going to make history tomorrow, one way or another. A friend. Elena never found out who sent the message, but it made her smile. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, slept deeply. The 29th day. Presentation day. Elena woke at 5 a.m., took a long shower, put on her best suit, a simple but elegant black set she had bought years ago for graduation, pulled her hair into a professional bun, looked in the mirror. You've got this, she said to her reflection. No matter what happens today, you've already proven something. You've proven you're not invisible. By 8 a.m., she entered Thornfield Industries' main conference room. The room was set up like a courtroom. A long table at the front where the 5 investors would sit. A lone table in the middle for her presentation, and rows of chairs behind, filling with executives, journalists, and curious onlookers. Richard was there, speaking with his father. Both looked at her as she entered. Richard smiled, a predator's smile. Elena set her laptop on the table and began configuring the presentation. Her hands were surprisingly steady. One by one, the panel investors arrived. Victoria Blackwood stormed in, her high heels echoing on the marble floor, looking at Elena like she was an insect. David Park walked in, glancing at his phone, clearly bored before it even began. Samira Al-Rahman entered with a team of 3 assistants, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. James Kowalski arrived carrying a folder at least 2 inches thick, clearly prepared to demolish every number. And Richard Thornfield Sr. entered last, a 68-year-old man with perfectly combed gray hair and a suit that probably cost more than Elena's car. Everyone sat. Silence fell over the room. Over 100 people were now present watching. Victoria Blackwood glanced at her watch. Ms. Rodriguez, you have 60 minutes to convince us. I suggest you do not waste our time. Elena took a deep breath. This was the moment. Everything she had worked for in the past 29 days. 5 years of humiliation. A lifetime of postponed dreams. It all came down to this hour. She turned on the projector. The first slide appeared on the screen, but it was not what anyone expected. No sleek corporate logo, no complex charts. Just one question in simple letters. Who deserves to lead? Elena looked at the panel and began. You 5 represent the absolute top of the investment industry. You have decided the fate of hundreds of companies. You have made and destroyed careers with a single yes or no. She paused. And you all share one thing in common. You came from wealthy families or with connections. You all could afford elite education. You all had mentors and doors opened for you. Victoria frowned. Get to the point. The point, Elena said, her voice growing stronger, is that there are millions of people as smart as you, as capable as you, as visionary as you, who will never get a chance because they weren't born with the right connections or the right money. And this is not only unfair, it is economically foolish. She clicked to the next slide. Finally, some data. Every year, roughly 2 million people in the United States try to advance to executive leadership positions. Only 200,000 succeed. Not because 90% are incompetent, but because 90% cannot afford the leadership development programs that would open those doors. James Kowalski leaned forward, interested despite himself. Elena continued, her presentation flowing. She showed the projections, the business model, the technology, how Phoenix would differ from all other online education platforms. But most importantly, she told stories. Real stories of real people trapped in positions below their potential. 60 minutes later, she finished. The room was completely silent. Thank you for your time, Elena said simply. Now came the hardest part. The questions. and the judgment. Victoria Blackwood was the first to speak, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. Interesting theater, Ms. Rodriguez. Very emotional, but let's talk real numbers. You project 5 million users by year 3. On what basis? The online education market is saturated. Coursera, Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, all already offer leadership courses. Why would anyone choose your platform? Elena had expected this question, because none of these platforms offer what Phoenix offers. AI-driven personalized curation that analyzes not just what you need to learn, but how you learn best. More importantly, Phoenix doesn't just teach theory. It connects users with real mentors, actual executives who have already walked the path. She clicked to a slide showing partnerships already secured. I already have preliminary commitments from 300 C-level executives willing to serve as mentors on the platform. Victoria raised an eyebrow, slightly impressed, but she didn't admit it aloud. 300, out of millions of executives worldwide. Impressive. It's a start, Elena replied calmly, and each mentor can guide up to 20 mentees per year. That's 6,000 people impacted directly in the first year. Organic growth from there. David Park leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. I'll be frank, Ms. Rodriguez. I rejected Uber. I rejected Airbnb. I rejected Instagram. You know why? Because all those ideas seemed like variations of existing concepts. Transportation always existed. Hotels always existed. Photo sharing always existed. He looked directly at her. Online executive education has always existed. Why would this be any different? The room tensed. This was the fundamental question. Elena could feel Richard smiling, thinking Park had just destroyed her entire case, but Elena smiled, a genuine smile. Mr. Park, with all due respect, you are asking the wrong question. The question is not why would this be different. The question is, why has everything else failed? She advanced to another slide. Existing online education platforms have a completion rate of only 7%. 7. Do you know why? Because education isn't about content consumption. It's about transformation. And transformation requires 3 things: personalization, accountability, and community. Phoenix is built entirely around these 3 pillars. She displayed the technical framework. Our AI algorithm doesn't just recommend courses. It tracks progress, identifies when a user is losing motivation, and intervenes, not with annoying notifications, but by connecting the user with someone in their community who has faced the same struggle. Education as a relationship, not as a product. David Park nodded slowly. Continue. As for technological differentiation, Elena looked at Samira Al-Rahman, anticipating her next question. We have filed 3 patent applications, one for the adaptive learning system, one for the mentor-mentee matching algorithm that considers not just skills but personality compatibility, and one for our proprietary leadership readiness metric that goes beyond traditional competency measurements. Samira leaned back, eyebrows slightly raised. She had clearly expected Elena to have no intellectual property protection. 3 patents pending, she murmured, making a note. James Kowalski opened his massive folder. Let's talk money. Your projected revenue numbers for year 3 are $800 million, assuming 5 million users at $500 per month for an average of 13 months. But your projected 73% retention rate is optimistic, considering the industry average is 40%. True, Elena agreed. If we use the industry average, our year 3 revenue would be $450 million. Still substantial. But our retention rate isn't optimistic. It's conservative based on the mentorship model. People don't abandon relationships as easily as they abandon courses. Our beta tests show 81% retention after 12 months. Beta tests? James asked, surprised. You ran beta tests in 29 days? No, Elena said. I ran beta tests over the last 18 months. The room erupted in murmurs. Richard stood. Wait a minute. You had this idea before the bet? That's cheating. It's not, Robert Fitzgerald said from the audience. The terms were that she present a business plan in 30 days, not that she couldn't use prior work. You didn't specify that, Richard. Richard looked ready to explode. "Father, are you seeing this? Silence, Thornfield Sr. said, his voice carrying absolute authority. Richard immediately shut his mouth, but his eyes were shooting fire. Thornfield Sr. looked at Elena with renewed interest. "Continue, Ms. Rodriguez." Elena took a deep breath. "I've been developing Phoenix as a side project for a year and a half. Not because I planned to leave Thornfield Industries, but because I needed to keep my mind active. I needed to remind myself that I am more than my job title." She looked directly at Richard. "And yes, I used company resources for some of the tests. I used lunch breaks. I leveraged connections I made through work. But check the employment contract, Richard. There is no intellectual property clause for non-executive employees. Anything I create in my personal time is mine." A lawyer in the audience nodded, confirming this. Richard was practically vibrating with rage. "You lied, "I never lied," Elena cut him off. "You never asked about my life outside of work, never cared who I was beyond the secretary who served your coffee. This is not cheating, Richard. This is you being so arrogant you couldn't see who was actually working for you." Victoria Blackwood slammed her hand on the table. "Enough drama. Let's get back to business." She looked at Elena, and for the first time there was something that resembled respect in her eyes. "You mentioned 300 committed mentors. Who are these people? Big names or just your college friends?" Elena smiled and clicked to the next slide. 20 names appeared. 20 CEOs, CTOs, and VPs from Fortune 500 companies. Some even made Victoria blink in surprise. "How did you get them?" Victoria asked. "I asked," Elena said simply. "I discovered that many successful executives genuinely want to give back. They want to mentor. But traditional mentorship programs are poorly organized and time-consuming. Phoenix solves this with smart scheduling, structured 30-minute sessions, and tools to make mentorship efficient. For mentors, it's not a burden, it's rewarding." Samira Al-Rahman looked directly at Elena. "Let me ask the most important question. Why you? You have a master's degree, yes, but zero experience running a company, zero experience raising capital, zero experience scaling technology. Why would anyone give $100 million to a secretary with no track record?" The entire room held its breath. The question everyone was thinking. Elena did not look away. "Because I am exactly the person Phoenix was designed to serve. I am talented, educated, capable, but I was held back because I didn't have the right connections. I understand the problem viscerally because I lived it. And as for experience," she paused, "every successful CEO was inexperienced once. Steve Jobs had never managed a company when he founded Apple. Mark Zuckerberg was a college student. Experience is built, not inherited. And I have something experience cannot teach. I am hungry. Hungry to prove myself. Hungry to succeed. Hungry to change a system that keeps people like me out." The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was contemplative. Richard Thornfield Sr. finally spoke, his voice measured and calm. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to ask a question you won't expect, and I want complete honesty." "Yes, sir." "If we give you $100 million, what is the first thing you would do?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Hire an experienced CEO." Gasps echoed through the room. Even the investors looked surprised. "You just argued passionately why you should lead this," Thornfield Sr. said. "And now you're saying you'd hire someone to replace you?" "Not to replace me," Elena corrected. "To complement me. I will be the founder and chief vision officer, but I am smart enough to know what I don't know. I've never scaled a multi-million-dollar company, so I'll find someone who has. Someone who can teach me. Because Phoenix isn't about my ego. It's about impact. And impact requires humility to surround yourself with people better than you in specific areas." Thornfield Sr. leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced, studying Elena intently. "In the last 50 years," he said slowly, "I've reviewed thousands of business plans, seen hundreds of entrepreneurs pitch. And you know the most common mistake? Ego. People so passionate about their ideas they can't see the flaws. So passionate about themselves they can't admit limitations. He paused, and the entire room was on edge. You just demonstrated something few founders have. True self-awareness. That, Ms. Rodriguez, is more valuable than any MBA. Richard looked like he was about to have a meltdown. Father, you can't be. I said silence. Thornfield Sr. cut him off without even looking at his son. Victoria Blackwood flipped through her notes. Let me be clear. Your plan has flaws. Your market penetration projections are aggressive. Your customer acquisition strategy needs more detail. And your scaling timeline is optimistic. She looked at Elena. But the core concept is solid. The need is real. And you, frustratingly, convinced me you can execute. David Park nodded. Agreed. I reject 99% of the plans I see. This would be in the 1%. Samira Al-Rahman smiled slightly. IP protection is strong. Technology is innovative. Needs refinement, but the foundation is there. James Kowalski scribbled numbers frantically. Finally, he looked up. The numbers work. Barely, but they work. With adjustments to CAC assumptions and burn rate, this could be profitable by year 4. All eyes turned to Thornfield Sr. The old man looked at his son, standing, trembling with rage and disbelief. Then he looked at Elena. Before I vote, he said, I want to make one observation. My son bet his personal fortune on this wager, $3.2 billion, because he believed with absolute certainty that a secretary could never do what executives do, that titles define capability, that positions define value. He rose, walking around the table to stand in front of Elena. I built Thornfield Industries from scratch, started with a single textile factory and turned it into an empire. Do you know why? Not because I was the smartest, not because I had the best connections, but because I knew talent when I saw it. Raw talent, not polished. Hunger, not privilege. He looked at Richard. And somewhere along the way, I failed to teach my son the same lesson. He turned back to Elena. Ms. Rodriguez, under any other circumstance, I would have had difficulty voting against my own son. But you reminded me of something I had forgotten. Business isn't about family loyalty. It's about recognizing opportunity. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. So here is my vote, Thornfield Sr. said clearly. I would invest in Phoenix. Richard staggered back as if physically struck. Father, you can't. This is business, Richard, the older man said coldly. Something you apparently never truly understood. Victoria Blackwood smiled. Not a pleasant smile. A predator recognizing another predator. 4 votes in favor, she said. The bet is won. The world stopped. Elena felt her knees weaken. She had won, truly won. The room erupted in chaos. Journalists swarmed. Executives stood, some applauding, some in shock. Marcus was yelling and cheering from the audience, but Elena could only look at Richard Thornfield. The man who had humiliated her for 5 years stood frozen, his face pale. He had just lost $3.2 billion. Everything, to sheer arrogance. Robert Fitzgerald approached Elena, extending his hand. Congratulations. And for the record, I'd like to discuss being one of your first additional investors. Phoenix deserves more than $100 million. Thornfield Sr. stepped forward next. Ms. Rodriguez, my vote was based on merit, not punishing my son. But perhaps this hard lesson was what he needed. He lowered his voice. And between us, if you're looking for an experienced CEO to hire, I know some excellent candidates. I'd be happy to make introductions. Elena could barely process what was happening. Too much. Too fast. Victoria Blackwood paused as she left. Don't disappoint me, Rodriguez. I voted yes because I believe in Phoenix, but if you waste this opportunity, I will personally make sure everyone knows. I won't waste it, Elena said, her voice finally steady again. I promise. When the chaos finally began to settle and people started leaving, only 3 remained in the room. Elena, Richard, and curiously, Thornfield Sr. Richard sat in the chair where he had started the day so confident, head in his hands. How dare you, he finally whispered, looking at his father. How could you vote against your own son? Thornfield Sr. looked at him with something resembling disappointment. Because my son needs to learn that arrogance without substance is just noise. You inherited an empire, Richard, but never built anything yourself. Never had to prove yourself. Never experienced real failure. And now I've lost everything, Richard shouted, standing. $3 billion. You destroyed my future for a secretary. No, the older man said calmly. You destroyed your own future by betting something you weren't willing to lose. And she is not a secretary. She is an entrepreneur who was working below her potential because you were too blind to see. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. And Richard, $3 billion isn't everything. You still have your position in the company. You still have opportunities. The question is, will you use this to grow or to blame others? He left, leaving Elena and Richard alone. Richard looked at her, and for the first time she didn't see arrogance. She saw something closer to defeat, perhaps even emerging humility. You planned all this, he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only exhaustion. You've been building Phoenix for months. You manipulated me into making this bet. No, Elena said honestly. I was building Phoenix for myself to keep my sanity. When you made the bet, I simply used what I had. She paused. Richard, you could have won. If you had chosen a fair panel. If you had trusted the merit of the challenge instead of stacking the deck. But you were so determined to destroy me, you couldn't see that you were destroying yourself. Richard laughed bitterly. Lesson learned, brutally. Elena grabbed her bag and turned to leave. But then, surprising even herself, she paused. Richard, you are still CEO of Thornfield Industries. You still have resources most people can only dream of. You can let this destroy you, or you can use it to become the leader you should have been. He looked at her, surprised by the offer of something that resembled compassion. Why do you care? He asked. Because, Elena said softly, someone gave me a chance once, even when I didn't deserve it, even when I had given up on myself, and it changed everything. She walked to the door. Phoenix is hiring in 6 months. If you ever want to prove that you're more than your last name, more than your father's money, my door is open. Not as CEO, as an assistant, starting from zero. She left before he could respond, but as she walked down the corridor, she heard the faintest sound behind her. Richard Thornfield was crying. 6 months later, Elena stood on stage at a tech conference being interviewed about the launch of Phoenix. The platform had exploded beyond all expectations. 500,000 users in the first 3 months, 1,000 mentors, incredible stories of people transforming their careers. So, Ms. Rodriguez, the interviewer asked, when you look back at that day at Thornfield Industries when everything changed, what do you feel? Elena thought carefully. Gratitude, not for the humiliation, but because it forced me to stop hiding. I spent 5 years invisible because it was safer, because it was easier, because I was afraid to try and fail. She looked at the audience. How many of you are doing the same thing? Hiding your potential because it's safer? Accepting less because you're afraid to ask for more? The audience was silent, many nodding. Phoenix isn't just an education platform, Elena continued. It's a movement. A movement that says talent exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. And we are going to change that. The crowd erupted in applause. Backstage after the interview, Marcus found her. Elena, you need to see this. He showed her his phone. An article. Richard Thornfield resigns as CEO, announces new philanthropic role in education. Elena read the article. Richard had created a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships for leadership development programs. He wasn't using money. He had none left. He was using his name and connections. It was a start. 2 years later, Phoenix had grown to 5 million users. Stories were everywhere of people who had transformed their lives. A nurse became a hospital administrator. An Uber driver launched his own tech startup. A janitor became a Fortune 500 operations manager. Elena was at the Phoenix office, a beautiful building in Silicon Valley, when she received an unexpected visitor. Richard Thornfield was at the reception, holding a resume. Elena led him into her office. He looked different, leaner, less polished, more human. "I came because you said your door was open," he began, clearly uncomfortable. "I know it was probably just rhetoric, but..." "It wasn't," Elena interrupted. "You're actually looking for a job?" Richard nodded. "My foundation is going well, but I realized something. I've never really worked, never really built anything with my own hands, and I want to learn, not to get back what I lost, but to become who I should have been from the start." Elena looked at the resume, surprisingly honest about his flaws and limitations. "We have an opening," she finally said. "Mentor coordinator. You'd help recruit and guide executives for the mentorship program. Starting salary, $65,000 per year. No private office, no assistant, no special privileges." Richard exhaled. "I accept." "And Richard," Elena added, "you'll report to Marcus Chen. Remember him? From IT? He's our VP of operations now." Richard smiled, a real laugh. Poetic. They shook hands. "Welcome to Phoenix," Elena said. "Let's see if you can fly." 5 years after that fateful day in the Thornfield Industries conference room, Elena Rodriguez was on Forbes' 40 Under 40 list. Phoenix had changed tens of millions of lives. The platform was valued at $8 billion. But what made her most proud wasn't the numbers or the awards. It was the messages, thousands of them, from people who had been invisible, forgotten, underestimated, who were now leading teams, starting businesses, changing their communities. Elena still had Richard's original bet email. She kept it as a reminder, not of her victory, but of her own transformation, because the real lesson wasn't that she had silenced the arrogant millionaire. It was that she had finally found her own voice, and in the process, she had helped millions of others find theirs. The Business Insider reporter eventually published an article about the entire saga. It ended with a quote from Elena. "People ask if I ever forgave Richard Thornfield, but that's the wrong question. It's not about forgiveness. It's about understanding that we are all capable of arrogance when we have power. We are all capable of kindness when we lose it. Richard gave me the greatest gift without meaning to. He forced me to stop waiting for permission to be who I was meant to be." The last line of the article read, when asked if she would ever thank Richard Thornfield for the bet that changed her life, Elena Rodriguez smiled and said, "Every time a Phoenix student lands their dream job, I give thanks. Not to him, but to all of us who have the courage to bet on ourselves." If you're enjoying this inspiring story, subscribe to the channel and comment below which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story is reaching. And remember, somewhere right now, there's someone like Elena Rodriguez, someone invisible, someone underestimated, someone waiting for the right moment to prove their worth. Maybe that person is you. The question isn't whether you have talent, it's whether you have the courage to bet on it. Because in the end, the greatest bet isn't about money. It's about believing that you are more than your current title, more than your current circumstances, more than anyone has ever told you that you could be. Elena Rodriguez made that bet, and she changed everything.